All right. Permit me to welcome everyone who has been able to join us from different parts of the world to this November edition of the University of Pretoria Philosophy Seminar. The UP Philosophy Seminar is designed to allow scholars bring on board new and fresh ideas on different topics that they are working on. And it holds quarterly, and this is going to be the November edition. And we shall be hosting Dr. Uchenna Ogbonnaya, who is already here to entertain us and enlighten us. Perhaps I should go straight to introduce him, but before I do that, permit me to recognize all of us colleagues here who have joined, including my colleagues in the department. I can see Professor Thaddeus Mez, and maybe others are going to join. It's a busy time of the year. So thank you once again, every one of you, and please may I ask all of us to mute ourselves and remain muted till after the presentation, when I shall reopen the microphone and the chat box for us to engage with our speaker for today. Okay, thank you very much. So let me introduce our speaker family. He is Dr. Uchenna Ogbonnaya. He is a postdoc at the Department of Philosophy, University of Pretoria, South Africa. He holds a PhD from the University of Calabar. And some of his areas of specialization and research interest include African philosophy, logic, metaphysics, philosophy of religion, and applied philosophy. Ogbonnaya has published quite a good number of articles and chapters in international journals and edited collections, and presented quite a host of talks in different conferences, colloquia, and even workshops. He serves in the editorial board of Philosophia Theoretica, Journal of African Philosophy, Culture and Religions. And in addition, he is a member and secretary of the Conversational Society of Philosophy. Dr. Ogbonnaya is currently working on a research project titled Decoloniality through Conversational Thinking, and of course, a new manuscript in the area of African metaphysics. So it's quite a whole lot to say about this scholar, and without much ado, permit me to welcome Dr. Uchenna Ogbonnaya to give us his talk titled Conversational Philosophy as Social Philosophy in the next 35, 40, 45 minutes or thereabout. And before we open the microphone to engage with him and share knowledge, as the case may be. Thank you very much, and welcome all of you from every part of the world who have been able to join us. Dr. Ogbonnaya, if you're there, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, let me try to share my screen. Please just give me a few moments to share my screen before I begin. Hope you can see the screen.
I
Hello?
think it's coming up. I think it's coming up. It hasn't yet shown on mine, but I can see a sign that it's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I thank the HOD of the Department of Philosophy, the University of Pretoria. I also thank the coordinator of the UP Philosophy Seminar and the members of the Department of Philosophy, the University of Pretoria, for finding me worthy to present this month's UP Philosophy Seminar. Given that Dr. Chimakonam and I have been working on conversational thinking as a decolonial theory, here I wish to tap into that research to engage in an aspect. And we should note that conversational philosophy is a philosophical system that is African culture inspired and articulated by Jonathan Chimakonam and has been adopted by members of the Conversational School of Philosophy as their philosophical trend. This philosophical system is being developed by members of the Conversational School of Philosophy, otherwise known as the conversationalists, into a philosophic tradition like analytic, continental, and pragmatic traditions of philosophy. It is also worthy of note that this philosophical system has been developed as a method of doing philosophy, and members of the Conversational School of Philosophy and the conversationalists have employed it in addressing metaphysical and existential issues in philosophy and beyond philosophy. Furthermore, we should note that the conversationalists have also developed it into the diverse branches of philosophy, such as metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and ethics. But my aim in this work is not to dive into discussing it from any of these branches, but to also argue that conversational thinking can be seen as social philosophy, which is a branch of philosophy. To go about this task, I'm going to start by looking at an insight into social philosophy. I wish to state here that the central question that drives social philosophy has to do with how should we live in the society? How should human exist in the society? So in social philosophy, what stands out is the society. But when you begin to look at social philosophy as that which has to do with the society, there's that temptation to look at social philosophy as related to the social sciences. Yes, it is related to the social sciences, but it is not a social science. Why the social sciences like political philosophy, like political science, economics, sociology, to mention but a few, deals with specifics in the society. Social philosophy engages with the entirety of the issues being handled in these specifics. So when we're talking about social philosophy as being concerned with the society, it gives us the picture that the society is what we need to pay attention to. And we should know that the society is a collection of individuals who are coexisting and have common goal. And given that the society is a collection of individuals, it implies that these individuals who are humans are social beings, as stated by Aristotle. And in as much as these individuals are social beings, they are engaged in social relationship. This social relationship is a relationship of coexistence and interactions. In as much as we're talking about social relationship, there are two dimensions to social relationship, which are the two types of social relationship. One is the close relationship, and the other is the open relationship. In the close relationship, it's an anthropocentric relationship where the concern is about human relationship with one another. Hence, the center is the interaction amongst humans. So this is close because it is limited within the human environment, which is, it engages only the human persons to the exclusion of non-human entities. The second, being the open relationship, has to do with nature-centered relationship. Here, it transcends the human entities relating with each other to a relationship that includes both the human entities and the non-human entities. Given that there is social relationship in the society, and that philosophy is concerned with the society and especially social philosophy, then we can say that social philosophy is that branch of philosophy that is concerned with social relationships and interaction. Also, it is necessary to note that social philosophy deals with social challenges. The point here is that in as much as we are concerned with discussing human existence in the society, and this existence of human in the society leads us to social relationship. And as we interact in the society, humans are bound to have some pitfalls which are known as social issues or social challenges. Some of these social challenges include problems like racism, ethnocentrism, gender injustice, xenophobia, religious crisis, and environmental challenges. In as much as we say that these challenges are the issues that we see in the society, social philosophy, which is aimed at trying to see how we can exist in the society, becomes a philosophical system that is aimed at highlighting and addressing these social challenges. If this be the case, then we can say that social philosophy is a critical and rigorous investigation into the social world and its accompanying social challenges. The point here is that in as much as we struggle through the philosophical tools to engage with our society and the challenges of the society, the aim of the social philosopher is to see to it that the society is well organized and there is social order and harmony. This implies that social philosophy is a philosophy that is concerned with social morality. And that is why Mackenzie notes that social philosophy has to do with explaining the nature of society in the light of the principle of solidarity and the norms of unity. So all that social philosophy seeks to do is to organize humans in the society. So it is done through some social norms, and that is why it is termed social morality, or the philosophy of social morality. It is also necessary to note that social philosophy has some characteristic features. Some of these characteristic features include it is normative, it is evaluative, it is speculative, it is also critical and constructive. I will just spend a little time to explain this by noting that in as much as we talk about social philosophy as being normative, it is concerned with prescribing how humans ought to live in the society in order to achieve the highest good, social order, stability, harmony, and peaceful coexistence in the society. Number two, social philosophy is evaluative in as much as it evaluates the various norms that are employed to see to it that humans in the society achieve common good, social order, stability, and harmony in the society. Social philosophy is evaluative because it's stipulative because it stipulates the fundamental principles of human behavior, the supreme good, human life, and the purpose of the entire existence. So I should say that it tries to tell us how we ought to live in the society. Number 4, social philosophy is critical. It is critical because it engages in criticizing actual social existence and also points to us how we can live. So when it engages, it also tries to engage with the logic of social relations. Well, it asks the question of what is the logic that guides human social existence or human interaction? How do we exist in the society? So it asks critical questions and also criticizes the norms that underguides human coexistence in the society. Number 5, social philosophy is constructive. Social philosophy does not just stop at criticizing the norms or the logic that underguides human existence or interaction in the society. It also seeks to reconstruct these critiqued norms to see to it that better norms are developed to keep the society moving. Like I said earlier, the argument so far about social philosophy is that it is a branch of philosophy that concerns itself with social relationship and addresses and also seeks to solve social problems in human society in order to make the society better. With this point made about social philosophy, it becomes conversational thinking. I would like to state here that conversational thinking has to do with a philosophical system that is African culture inspired. It is African culture inspired, as I stated earlier in my introductory remark, because it is predicated on the sub-Saharan African notion of relationship. And this relationship is seen when scholars or philosophers engage themselves in trying to address human existential issue. I'm going to come back to this when I begin to discuss conversational thinking as a method. But it is germane to note that there are 3 dimensions to conversational thinking. The first is the foundational dimension, the second is the architectural dimension, the third is the doctrinal dimension. The foundational dimension argues that every philosophical system is undergirded by a logic. And for the conversationalist, this logic is a summative logic. The architectural dimension holds that every philosophical system must have a method. And for the conversationalist, the method of conversational thinking as a philosophical system is conversationalism. I'm going to discuss conversationalism at length when I come to discussing the issue of method in conversational thinking. And number 3, the doctrinal dimension. The doctrinal dimension is concerned with theory and philosophy. And for the conversationalist, the philosophy of conversational thinking is conversational philosophy. We should also note, as I stated earlier, that conversational thinking has been developed into different branches of philosophy, and specifically the traditional branches of philosophy, which include metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and ethics. And for the conversationalist, the metaphysics of conversational thinking is known as Mekoka metaphysics, while the epistemology of conversational thinking is known as cognonormative epistemology. The logic of conversational thinking is known as ezumezu logic. I would like to explain the difference between this point that one of the branches is ezumezu logic. It is quite different from looking at it from the perspective of the foundational dimension of conversational thinking. And in the conversation, in the foundational dimension, we are saying that the logic that undergirds conversational thinking is Ezumezu logic. But here we are saying that the logic that is in use when we begin to do conversational thinking or conversational reflection or using the method of conversational philosophy is Ezumezu logic. So here, Ezumezu logic is the logic in use, not just only the logic that informs conversational thinking. It's the logic that the conversationalists employ when engaging with any existential issue. Number 4, the ethics of conversational thinking is known as Uze Ezumezu ethics. I will further move on to look at conversational thinking proper. Here, I wish to start by noting that conversational thinking seeks to answer 2 questions. The first has to do with the methodological question, and the second has to do with the doctrinal question. In the methodological question, we are concerned with what method should a conversationalist employ when doing philosophy. While in the doctrinal issue, we are asking what philosophy do we arrive at when we employ the method of conversational thinking. So let us look at the method of conversational thinking. Before we look at the method of conversational thinking, we should note that the word conversation is derived from the Igbo word arumaruka or iruka. But for the purpose of this work, I will restrict myself to using the word arumaruka. The word arumaruka means to doubt. It means to doubt the position or assertion of another by another scholar, with the goal of looking for fault and also reconstructing this lacuna that has been discovered, such that it could lead to the development of new concepts, new ideas, and new thoughts. So when we are talking about conversationalism, we are talking about a method of philosophy that is involved in doubting, but this doubting is aimed at fault-finding and reconstruction of thought. That's to say, conversationalism as a method of philosophy include deconstruction and reconstruction. There is the deconstruction of concept, ideas, thought on the one hand, and the reconstruction of concept, ideas, and thought on the other hand. But it will interest you to note that there are 2 major epistemic agents that are involved in this act of conversation. There are Nwansa and Nwanju. These 2 are involved in what the conversationalists call critical and creative engagement. In this critical and creative engagement, there is no room for creative surrender as they engage on any philosophical issue. Rather, there is room for creative struggle. That is why conversationalism as a method of philosophy gives room for a ceaseless engagement between Nwansa and Nwanju as they try to engage or address any philosophical issue. At this point, I wish to tell us that Nwansa can serve as the proponent of an idea, while Nwanju serves as an opponent of an idea. While Nwansa asserts a position, Nwanju opposes such position, not just opposing, but with a view of bringing out new positions. So conversational method points to the fact that there's a ceaseless engagement between those epistemic agents, and the results of their findings are further engaged with. So conversational thinking here as a method is employed to see that philosophy takes its dynamic nature, because we continue to search for truth and search for answers to the problem bedeviling humanity. with this stated, we should note that the philosophy that is derived when we use conversationalism to do philosophy is known as conversational thinking. Conversational philosophy. And in as much as we are using conversational thinking to do philosophy, there is a clear-cut understanding that there is a distinction between conversational thinking as a method and conversational thinking as a philosophy. The philosophy is produced when once there is a critical and creative engagement between Nwansa and Nwanju on human existential challenges or human existential or human phenomenological problems that humans encounter in the society. And when once we arrive at these solutions are tentative because these solutions are further engaged by other philosophers. And this leads to the discovering of more solutions. The point here is that conversational thinking as both a method and a philosophy gives us the insight that conversational thinking is dynamic, as I stated earlier. I would like to also look at some points or salient points that will help us grasp our discussion so far. One of the points is that in conversational thinking, there are two epistemic agents. One is Nwansa and the other is Nwanju. In the course of my explanation, I failed to state clearly that the interaction that takes place between Nwansa and Nwanju is at a particular point, not at the conversational point. Hence, these two conversational agents meet and convert at the conversational point known as Nwa Izube. That's the meeting point. Number three, the conversation that is engaged in by Nwansa and Nwanju has two characteristic features. One is that it is critical, and the other is that it is creative. It is critical in the sense that it questions the idea that have been put forward or the concept put forward or the thought put forward. It is creative in that in as much as it questions the concept, ideas, and thought that have been put forward, it also tries to create new concepts, new ideas, and new thoughts from it. And that is why it is an evolving system. Number four, in as much as Nwansa and Nwanju are engaged in conversation, this conversation is done in an aromaristic relationship. This also takes us to number five, which is that aromaristic relationship involves maker, and the word maker, the Igbo word maker, means complementarity. So every aromaristic relationship, according to the conversationalist, involves complementarity. I'm going to emphasize this when I try to look at how conversational thinking is social philosophy. Number six, we should note that the object of concern of conversational thinking is existential and phenomenological challenges. So in as much as we've been able to look at this and see the major points that conversational thinking tries to give to us, we should know that this point have some implication for the argument that conversational thinking can be seen as social philosophy. The question begging for an answer at this point is, how is conversational thinking a social philosophy? How is conversational thinking a social philosophy? I will answer this question in three dimensions. First, I would argue that the characteristic features of conversational thinking are related to the characteristic features of social philosophy. Number two, I'm going to also argue that the relationship that exists between Nwansa and Nwanju is a social relationship. And number three, I'm going to argue that conversational thinking can be used to address some social issues. Let me begin by looking at the features of conversational thinking as sharing some similarities with social philosophy. First, we have established that conversational thinking has two characteristic features. One is that it involves critical engagement. And number two is that it involves creative engagement. Now, if you look at the 5 characteristics of social philosophy, you will see that it involves being critical, being evaluative, being speculative, being constructive, and being normative. And when we look at it, you see that when you're talking about conversational thinking, in getting involved or being a critical engagement, we can see the similarities by saying that it involves critical engagement. It involves evaluating. So for instance, since in social philosophy, we are talking about organizing the society, and the society is organized by some norms and values or ideals. So in as much as we are using conversational thinking, in one way we are engaging in the society or looking at the norms that guide the society by first employing critical engagement. As we employ critical engagement, we are using the method, the characteristics of criticality and evaluation in looking at it. We engage with the concept, with the norms that the society has been built on. As we engage with this norm, we try to look at faults within this norm. If it is not really promoting the well-being of the society, then this takes us to the second, which has to do with critical engagement. Permit me to say here that in as much as first conversational thinking employs criticality in the sense that it tries to find fault in the existing norms that guide the society, it doesn't stop there. It tries to profile new norms that will replace the old norms that are problematic to the society. Hence, we can see that conversational thinking involves construction. And that's why we can say that just like social philosophy, it is constructive. And in how much it is constructive, in the sense that it reconstructs and gives us a new idea, then it becomes normative. It defines how the society ought to be using the norms that have been articulated. Then also it speculates on how the society should be organized. We can also move on to the next point. We should note that there is an aromatic relationship in conversational thinking. And this aromatic relationship is also social relationship. So when we are talking about aromatic relationship, we are talking about the relationship that Nwansa and Nwanju get involved in. And they get involved in this relationship within Nwanzube. So in as much as this relationship is a relationship of interaction, it is called social relationship. It's also germane for us to note that Nwansa and Nwanju are the social agents because they are involved in the society and they are in a relationship of interaction and coexistence. The second point to note that Nwanzube is the society because it is the meeting point. So when we have the two social agents interacting within the society, we can then say that there is social philosophy taking place within such philosophy, within such society. So in this case, in as much as conversational thinking involves a social relationship and interaction between Nwanju and Nwansa, we can argue that conversational philosophy is social philosophy. The third point is that the existential and phenomenological challenges that conversational thinking is concerned with are all social challenges. So once we talk about conversational thinking engaging in epistemological, existential and phenomenological challenges, we are invariably saying that the conversationalists who might be addressing this issue are addressing social issues. So we can see that conversational thinking can address social issues or challenges such as racism, gender injustice, xenophobia, religious conflicts, environmental challenges, to mention but a few. The question now that comes to mind is how does conversational thinking address this issue? Or how can conversational thinking address these issues? Now, when you look at these issues are issues that concerns human relationship. And in as much as we are addressing this issue, the problem that comes with the challenges that we've mentioned is that they try to emphasize absolute identities, absolute difference that leads to exclusion. For instance, if you look at racism, there is the emphasis of absolute identity of a superior race, and they look at that difference as a reason to exclude other races. In gender injustice, a particular gender tries to deny other genders their position because they see themselves as distinct. They have an identity which the other do not have. And this difference becomes a reason to exclude the other gender from their basic or their fundamental rights. Xenophobia shares the same problem, wherein the indigenous try to exclude the strangers because they do not share their identity, they are quite different, and therefore they must be excluded from the society. Religious difference is also a reason for religious conflict. So the difference that exists, people try to identify with their differences and try to exclude those that are not like them, or because they do not share doctrinal similarities. Also, in the context of environmental challenges, we have environmental degradation because of that idea that humans want to identify with themselves and they see themselves from the anthropocentric perspective, where they see that every other entity, non-human entity, exists for the good of humans. So humans misuse it. These challenges are predicated on the philosophical principle of binary opposition, where on the one hand, there is a superior that has its own identity, that sees its difference as what should be prized, and those who are not members are excluded. But with conversational thinking, wherein there is the idea of mmeko that leads to a rumoristic relationship, we can see that we can go beyond the challenges that have been mentioned and have been discussed so far. Here, I wish to state that with the concept of mmeko, which means complementarity and solidarity, we can build a better relationship in our human society. So if we get involved with one another, try to complement one another, try to live in solidarity with one another as conversational thinking enjoys us to do, then we are going to have a better social relationship. And therefore the society will be a better organized society. Just like I said in the beginning of my presentation, that the goal of, or the central question that the social philosopher consigns himself or herself with is how should the society be organized? Conversational thinking is also concerned with similar. How should the society be organized? How should we live in a society? All that conversational thinking is crying out for us to get involved is to emulate the relationship that Nwansa and Nwanju are involved in So for me, conversational philosophy is social philosophy because it seeks to have a society that is progressive, that is in harmony, and that is better than it has ever been. This is why I'm going to pause and allow us to engage my thought and also raise questions as well as comments that will help me shape the work better. Thank you for listening. Hello, Dr. Chimakonam.
Yeah, thank you very much. Stop. You may have to stop sharing now so that yeah. Okay, while you sort that out, permit me to thank presenter for that wonderful talk he has just given us on the topic of conversational thinking as social philosophy. And his effort was to tease out conversational thinking as a form of social philosophy. Okay, that is good. Thank you. We appreciate that. And I think it's time for us to open up the microphone as well as the chat box for all of us here to get involved, asking questions, engage with him, give our contributions and comments, whichever one we want to do. So if you've got a question or anything you want to contribute, kindly raise your hand and I'll see you and give you the spot. All right, I can see Michael Emery. Michael Emery, please, could you unmute yourself and have your say.
All right, thank you very much. You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, my question will be, what is the difference between the conversational thinking and the dialectic method, for instance? Now, secondly, the aim of conversational thinking as given us in this paper, how is it different from Matibuba's I and thou when it comes to relationship? That would be my question, or questions rather.
Okay. Michael Emery, thank you for your question. Let me begin with the first question. There is a clear-cut distinction between conversational thinking and the dialectical method or the dialectics method. The first thing to note is that in the dialectic method, especially the Hegelian dialectics, there is the thesis and the antithesis leading to a synthesis. So there's always a final solution when engaging with a problem if I'm to apply it. But in conversational thinking, we have a particular thesis. We don't have a thesis, an antithesis. It is the particular thesis that is engaged with, and a new thesis is developed. But in the earlier work of Chimakonam, he tried to use thesis and antithesis, and that is a conflicting idea, which I don't agree with. I believe that there is only a thesis at a particular point. That's why in a paper I'm writing, I'm talking about conversational thinking as positionality. That is to say that in conversational thinking, there exists only one position. It is that position that is engaged by an opponent who will look for lacuna in that position. And if he finds lacuna, he also will build on that lacuna to develop his own position. It becomes another position. So there's a movement from thesis to new thesis, not for us to talk about thesis and antithesis, just like in the Hegelian dialectics. And number two, in the Martin Buber's I and thou relationship, there is always that separation between the two. The I is the I, and the thou is distinct. But here, it was also, why we are talking about the distinctness here, we talk about the distinctness and being affirmed within the whole, which is the conversational point. Thank you.
Okay, so I can see other hands up. Thank you very much for that question and for the answer. Eric, please, over to you. After you, I'll come to Chukwueloka Uduagwu. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you and good morning from here.
Thank you and good afternoon from here. Go on, please.
Yes, I think the last question you answered regarding dialectics, I think rather than Hegelian dialectics, I was thinking that question was more about Socratic dialectic. You know, the question was more about it. But then my own question is regarding the doctrinal aspect of conversational philosophy. The doctrinal, I saw the use of that term and somehow I was jolted. And I felt that doctrine will actually be an impediment. You know, doctrine has to do with a belief, you know, what the people who subscribe to conversational philosophy come to assume as a belief, something all of them will hold there. I'm thinking that doctrine will actually be an impediment to philosophy because there could be areas that you won't be able to interrogate. For instance, you have certain beliefs, just like we have in our religious traditions, which every member is assumed to believe. But then philosophy should be a continuous conversation. Philosophy, you know, we should be able to question everything. So that instead of labeling it doctrinal or doctrine, that philosophy like that is enough. Philosophy, you know, what I'm saying, doctrine, the term doctrine should constitute or will constitute an impediment to the development of conversational philosophy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your second issue raised. I think you're looking at doctrine from the religious perspective. When the conversationalists talk about doctrine, we're talking about a philosophical system that has been put forward. So it becomes what we hold on to. We see it as a philosophy, not necessarily a religious belief that is dogmatic, where you see that something that is sacrosanct, it cannot be changed. But here we believe that this philosophy is dynamic. So although we are using doctrine, we are using it in a broader sense. It transcends the realm of religion. So that's a problem. Okay, with respect to the issue you raised on the Socratic dialectics, yeah, the Socratic dialectics is quite also different from conversational thinking. While in the Socratic dialectics, a particular scholar interviews, it's much more like an interview. The conversation is much more of an interview. You ask the person question, he answers, and you ask further questions. Here, you are not restructuring the person's thought. It is the individual that is involved in reconstructing his thought as you ask for that question. But in conversational philosophy, what is done is that the proponent asserts a position which the opponent engages with. And as he engages with that, he looks for lacuna. And based on that lacuna, he develops his own position. And also the proponent can also engage your critique or the opponent's critique of his or her view and also produce new ideas or defend his own position. That's why in conversational thinking, we talk about construction and reconstruction of concept, ideas, and thoughts. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Ogbonnaya, let me welcome Uchenna Uduagwu to ask his questions or make contributions. Chukweloku, if you can hear me, the microphone is for you, please. Okay, perhaps he's trying to sort out his microphone. Let's go over to Zubairu Bambeli. Zubairu Bambeli, please take the microphone.
Thank you, Dr. Ogbonnaya, for this interesting my question is, if conversational thinking is social philosophy by virtue of the conversation that holds between Wanza and Wanju at a given point and about social challenges, can we now see that conversational thinking is also metaphysics or any other philosophy when the conversation between Wanza and Wanju is carried out within the context of all these other philosophies? Now, if the answer is in the affirmative, then is conversational thinking not all philosophies? Thank you. This is my question.
Okay, thank you. If you listen to me carefully, in my introductory remark, I tried to say that conversational thinking have been developed into different branches of philosophy. I also said it when I was discussing conversational philosophy proper. I didn't spend time to try to look at each of these branches of philosophy. Like I said in the course of discussing conversational philosophy proper, the point is that conversational philosophy has its own metaphysics, and that metaphysics is called Mekoka metaphysics. And therefore, when you're talking about Mekoka metaphysics, you're talking about a metaphysics that involves interaction. So there is that aromaristic relationship among entities or among beings or among realities. And this leads to the coexistence of being in the society, not only coexistence of being, there is the complementarity that comes with this coexistence of being. So being are always relating with one another, and as they relate with one another, they seek to see that every being is taken care of. If you read our book on African metaphysics, epistemology, and a neologic, a decolonial approach to philosophy, you'll see where we've really discussed this and show that Mekoka metaphysics deals with the relationship that comes wherein there is that idea of interconnectedness and interdependence of reality on one another. Just like if you must talk about conversational thinking, you must talk about conversational thinking in terms of Nwansa and Nwanju engaging themselves in an aromaristic relationship in Nwa Izube. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. Let's get back to.
Can I add something like what he was saying?
Okay.
Yes, we can develop it into other branches of philosophy. I have talked about 4, and I'm adding social philosophy. That's my own contribution now. Others can develop political philosophy from it. So that's not my concern, but we should look at it that it is philosophy and therefore can be developed into other branches of philosophy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Chukweloka, if you can unmute yourself now, please go on and ask your question. Okay, but if you cannot, okay, perhaps you have decided to chat it. I can see it and I'll read it out to you now, Dr. Ogbonnaya. Please listen. Chukweloka says, what is the difference between foundational logic and operational logic in conversational thinking? What is the difference between the foundational logic and the operational logic in conversational thinking?
Thank you, Chukweloka Odwago, for your question. I tried to explain that difference earlier on, but I wish to state that in the foundational dimension of conversational thinking, we are talking about the logic that influences or that shapes conversational thinking. So we're talking about a logic that underbellies conversational thinking. And this logic is a three-valued logic, and it is called a Zumezu three-valued logic. It's a true growth logic, a true growth trivalent logic, wherein the proposition is said to be true or false, or true and false, depending on the context. And we also will talk about the contextual mood and the complementary mood. In the contextual mood, it is either true or false, and in the complementary mood, it is true and false. If you see this, you see that it is the logic that informs the relationship that Nwansa and Nwanju are involved in Nwanzupe. Now you can talk about Nwansa, and you can also talk about Nwanju. And then there is a third point where Nwansa and Nwanju always meet and interact. So we cannot just talk about Nwansa and Nwanju as entities on their own, unless we go beyond their contextual mode to looking at it at the level of their complementary mode, which is at the point of Nwanzupe. That is how you see that Ezume's logic informs conversational thinking. But when we begin to do philosophy proper and begin to use Ezume's logic as a tool in doing conversational philosophy, at that point, it is no longer the foundation of conversational thinking, but the logic proper of conversational thinking. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's give Njabulu Lomo an opportunity to ask his question or make his comments. Njabulu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. The question I want to ask, when Dr. Lucky spoke about in conventional thinking about the thesis and the absence of an antithesis. In my view, there is a question that emerged that is it not that it undermines human nature and philosophical engagement when it's already prescribed that there's only a thesis in this kind of conventional thinking, because philosophers, first of all, might not be in agreement with the thesis placed before them before they try to engage that kind of thesis to develop another thesis. It's not an assumption that there can be a development of another thesis from the first thesis, because philosophers engage, and their engagement, in my view, is an engagement that cannot be policed. No, we can know the outcomes of that engagement. How can you say there is one thesis and this thesis will produce another thesis, while philosophers are so complex in their thinking they can produce an antithesis? Please balance me on that one.
Okay, Njabulu, thank you for your question. The main point I try to emphasize is that conversational thinking is not like the Hegelian dialectics, wherein we try to talk about thesis, then the production of an antithesis, which will counter the thesis and then leads to a synthesis. But here, what I'm trying to say is that there is always a position that is being asserted by the proponent of an idea. The proponent will put forward an idea. That idea becomes a thesis, but it does not produce a synthesis. That thesis is not a given. That is why it can be engaged with by other scholars who can then serve as opponents to this particular position. When they engage on this, they try to find fault in this thesis. And immediately they see a fault in this thesis. They don't stop at the fault-finding mission. It will be the use of critical theory. They go beyond the use of critical theory or fault-finding mission to try to reconstruct the initial thesis to get a new thesis. That's the position. We are not saying that the thesis that have been accepted is final. Even the new thesis that have been put forward can be further engaged by others. That's why I said that conversational philosophy is a ceaseless engagement between Nwansa and Nwanju. So it's a ceaseless, it's a continuous process. There is no room for creative surrender, but there is room for creative engagement, creative thinking.
Okay, thank you for that. And I can see Paul Michael, your hand is up. Please take the microphone, Paul Michael, if you're there. Unmute yourself. Okay. It appears he's having some issues with his microphone. Is there any other person who has questions or comments to make?
Doc, it seems there's a question on the chat box.
Okay.
It says this question came after my first intervention, and it concerns the relationship between Nwansa and Nwanju. Are their positions fixed or fluid? Please, their positions are not fixed. Now, there can be switch of position. That is why conversational philosophy is a dynamic philosophy. At a point where Nwansa accepts a position, he or she is Nwansa. But at a point where one tries to critique this position, he or she is Nwanju. But when Nwanju accepts his own position, he moves from Nwanju to become Nwansa because he is accepting a position. And where Nwansa tries to also engage the position of the former Nwanju, Nwansa takes the position of Nwanju. So this is how conversational thinking moves. There is that movement. I don't want to go into the intricacy of talking about the tension of incommensurability, the characteristic relationship, a lot of Benoke point and all those other points. But I just want to make you understand that these two agents, epistemic agent, can switch position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can see your hand, Chukwuemeka Ugosi. Unmute yourself and ask your question or engage with our presenter.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Loki, for that wonderful presentation. My question is, in this aromaristic engagement, which involves the Nwansa and the Nwanju, I'm looking at when this tension between the Nwansa and Nwanju, when the tension is overcharged, how can conversational thinking handle such an overcharged tension that might arise when this engagement between the Nwansa and Nwanju takes place? Thank you.
Well, in every conversational relationship, like I said, there is always a position that is asserted, and that position is subject to further engagement and reconstruction. And there is no point that the conversationalist would argue that we must resolve the tension. The tension is the continuous tension. Because if you say at any point we should resolve this tension, then you are invariably arguing that we should come to a point of conversation wherein we say, okay, we have to surrender and then have a consensus agreement on saying that this is the final answer, this is the final position. No, there is no provision for that. Conversational thinking allows us to further engage with each other. So the tension must always be there. Because at any point we stop conversing or engaging each other, then we've come to a dead end in philosophy.
Okay, thank you. For Michael, I can see you're back. Unmute yourself and ask your question or make your contribution.
Thank you, Prof. I guess you can hear me now. My question, mine is like a comment. I thank Dr. Ogbonnaya for shedding more light on conversational thinking. However, my query is that much of his time was given to showing the level of conversational thinking and social philosophy. I was expecting to hear more from the application of conversational thinking to social philosophy or as social philosophy, and I was really interested in that. Maybe because of constraint of time, but that's just my comment. I really want to see how that works. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, for Michael, for your contribution. Let's welcome Arabia Atto to ask his question or engage with presenter. Over to you, Arabia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jonathan, and thank you, Lucky. Sorry I came late for your talk, but I caught some things that you mentioned in your talk. I have two major concerns that I'd like you to shed more light on. The first one, I heard in your talk saying that in conversational thinking, there is no antithesis, but that there is thesis, and then that leads to the emergence of a new thesis, which strikes me as a bit problematic because from my reading of conversational thinking, I think rather than use thesis and antithesis, if we stick to the concept of Nwansa and Nwanju, you see that there is, the idea is that there is a creative struggle between both the Nwansa and the Nwanju, which you may call antithesis and antithesis. But in that struggle, there is no new synthesis or new thesis as per se, as you would say, but an improvement of both thesis and antithesis, or in the conversational sense, the improvement of both the Nwansa and the Nwanju to higher levels of sophistication and all that. So I wanted you to shed more light on that. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. The second concern I have, or the second question I have, is a much more practical question with regards to the practical use of conversationalism. What happens in a situation, for instance, where both potential Nwansa or Nwanju, or both opposing variables in a certain social context refuse to engage in conversation? Is there a remedy for that within the conversational view? And is there a term conceptually that captures such a situation where a certain variable or a certain context or a certain group refuses to engage in conversation and instead engages in anti-conversation, if you want to call it that? Thank you.
Let me start with the last question. Yeah, there are cases where people don't want to get engaged in conversation. They choose the other part, creative surrender. Or we can also talk about the conversation like that I mentioned, where answering one of the questions raised. At that point, there's no further conversation. There is no conversation. So it happens, and you see that at that level, we cannot really have a better society because people are not involved in conversation. So for the society to be a better place, we need to get engaged in conversation. And this conversation is much more of an aromaristic relationship of complementarity and solidarity. So we really need that. To your first question, you need to understand my position. In Chimakonam's earlier works published in 2015, one of it where he was reacting to Bruce Jan's positions or arguments on a philosophical space. And also the second one that he talked about transforming the African philosophical place. He used the thesis and antithesis to explain the relationship that ensues between Nwansa and Nwanju. I think it didn't go down well with me. And if you see his recent position, he has tried to shift ground. Thesis and antithesis do not really depict the two epistemic agents. Rather, it depicts the thoughts that are produced. And that is why I am not in support of the conversationalist using thesis and antithesis to depict Nwansa and Nwandu. It gives it's a kind of a misplace of words, or the misuse of words to categorize these agents, these epistemic agents. Rather, if you look at it, the confusion that comes is that, are you going to say that at the point that the Nwansa switches position, it becomes the thesis? So we confuse ourselves when we begin to use that idea. It becomes the antithesis. We confuse ourselves when we use that idea. Rather, we should go with proponent and opponent. And then we have always a thesis being asserted. When this thesis is developed upon through critical and creative conversation, we arrive at a new thesis, a new position. I am forced to use the word thesis. In the paper I'm writing on conversational thinking, I'm arguing on explaining further conversational thinking. I am arguing that conversational thinking deals with positionality, or conversational thinking is all about positionality. We always take a position when we are engaged in conversational thinking. So the point is that there is always a position being asserted, not necessarily thesis, but part of the question I was responding to, which has to do with the Hegelian dialectic. I said there is nothing like antithesis in conversational thinking. Rather, we have always a position, which we can liken to thesis. And we can also have new positions, new thesis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ogbonnaya, for that response. I am looking through to see if there are still other hands that are raised. If you still have something to say, this is the time. Okay, I can see your hand, Amara. Unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your presentation. I have a question. It's more of, let me call it a practical question, just like the last person said. My question is, how can conversational thinking solve religious conflicts, especially in Africa? Take, for instance, the religious crisis in Nigeria, where a group of fundamentalists, known as Boko Haram, try to Islamize the nation. How can conversational thinking help a nation like Nigeria solve this kind of issue? Thank you.
Chimakonam, thank you for your question. It's really a practical question. Yes, religious conflict abound, as I have discussed, and it is based on the fact that we look at our doctrinal differences. We try to hold onto our religious doctrine as so precious that we cannot really get ourselves into a state of engaging with others. So the only way we can address such situation, the problem is like the religious fundamentalists in the northern part of Nigeria, the Boko Haram. You see, they are faceless people. We don't know them. So how can we engage with them? So unless we are able to engage with other Muslims who are willing to listen to us and who can also pass the message to them, then we cannot really have a headway. But the most important thing is that there should be that religious openness for conversation to take place. Member adherents of different religions should be willing to open up to each other so that we can engage. That's what we can learn from each other. So conversational philosophy also gives us a room to learn from each other. That is why there should be more mutual, it can lead to mutual tolerance. The problem is that we are close to each other. If the Boko Haram members can come, we engage them, they can see from our own perspective, probably those of us who are Africans, who are neither Christian nor Muslim, we can teach them how to coexist with others and how to learn from the thoughts of others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that interesting response. I can see that Arabia has once again raised his hand. Arabia, please take the microphone.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up to my earlier question, I would like you to explain maybe just a bit more what you mean by new thesis. Because I think that the concept is still ringing in my head, and I'd like you to explain what you mean by it a bit more. And just another question: do you think conversational thinking is a method of doing African philosophy, or the method of doing African philosophy? Your response to the last question will determine the sort of follow-up I would have on that.
Let me start with the last question. Conversational philosophy is not the method of doing African philosophy. It's a method. We can still develop other methods, and we can still use other methods. So we must know we're not talking about conversation as the method. And also you should note that conversational philosophy, our conversational thinking is not just a method of doing African philosophy. It can also be used to do philosophy outside of Africa. That's why we argue, the conversationalists argue that conversational thinking as a method of doing philosophy can be used in doing African philosophy, and it can also be used beyond the doing of African philosophy. It's transcultural and can be used in doing Western philosophy, in doing Oriental philosophy, in doing Arabic philosophy, Jewish philosophy, and to mention but a few. It can also be used to do intercultural philosophy or comparative philosophy, depending on the type of comparative, either comparative within a particular philosophic tradition or comparative philosophy within the intercultural level. So it has a broader application. So although it is African culture inspired, it is universal in its applicability. With respect to my position on thesis and new thesis, in the paper I'm writing, I'm not even using the word new thesis. The only time I use it is to explain the use of, or to explain a way, or to try to argue against the use of thesis and antithesis in conversational thinking. For me, in conversational thinking, there's always a position, and that position is being asserted by Nwansa. And if it is engaged by Nwanjo, and then Nwanjo produce a new idea, that idea becomes a new position. And then Nwanjo takes a new position or takes a new nomenclature, which is Nwansa, because at that point, he or she is asserting a new position, a position of its own. So my argument is not that there must be a new thesis. Rather, my argument is that there is always a position which is subject to criticism and reconstruction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a hand I saw a while ago by Isaiah Negedu. If you are still interested in asking your question, please take the microphone, Isaiah. Then afterwards, we'll come to Michael and Mary.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ogbonnaya. Sorry, I actually became confused when you were responding to Arabia's first question on the issue of new position. So I was actually thinking that when in the first place, Nwanju and Nwansa don't mean the same thing. And what informs the response from the person opposing is the fact that there was first of all a thesis. So if you are talking of a new position or a new thesis, I don't know how you can move from having a thesis to a new thesis, because even that thesis in the first place for me is the first thesis and the first thesis was actually a new thesis. So it wasn't an old thesis. So here you are having two new theses. So I'm still confused when you talk of, one thesis and that there cannot be an antithesis, but a new position, when the first position was also a new position. So I don't know. Maybe you could clarify that.
Permit me to intervene here. I think Dr. Locke, there's been a lot of questions on these very points. Perhaps both of you can take it up after this session. Let's give Michael Emeru an opportunity for a follow-up, and then we know what to do next. Thank you.
Okay, because I was actually going to mention something about this new position also. Because one could ask, in philosophy, for instance, can there ever be a time that we actually come together and say, we have agreed on this? That is one. Now, secondly, when it comes to new position, which I can refer to now as several new positions, now, how do we have what you can call an objective position when it comes to morality, for instance? And also on this new position, are we speaking about an epistemic community or just an individual when it comes to this new position? So the engagement, is it like a communal thing or just an individual that is making this new position or new positions? All right, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Ogbonnaya, I will allow you to address this question one more time, or perhaps as a way of throwing in my own as well. Perhaps you can address the question by looking at telling us more about the conjunctive and disjunctive motions involved in creative struggle, and so that perhaps this thing you're saying might be a little clearer to us. As far as I'm concerned, is your own interpretation. Go on.
Okay. Everything that have been raised, all the questions that have been raised with respect to the argument on thesis and antithesis and the thesis and new thesis is as a result of our looking at it from the Hegelian dialectic perspective, wherein that if there is a thesis, there must be an antithesis. But in conversational thinking, and from my own thinking about conversational thinking, I don't think that is the case. For me, there is always a position. When once that position is asserted, what philosophers do is that they examine that position. And when they examine the position, they try to deconstruct it. And when once they deconstruct and find faults in it, they try to what? Reconstruct it. Don't stop at the fault finding. They try to reconstruct it. And in reconstructing it, they find a new position. Now, the point is not that they have to discover a thesis, an antithesis that contradicts the former thesis. No, the person builds on the thesis. And that's why I'm happy that you talk about the conjunctive and the disjunctive of motion in conversational thinking. Now, in conversational thinking, every scholar tries to engage the thought of another scholar or a position that is asserted by a particular scholar. And as they engage in it, they come to a point wherein one can tend to say, I am agreeing with this position. But after a critical engaging of that position, and you try to agree with that position, another scholar tries to agree with that position, you come to a point where there will be the tension of incommensurate. You start seeing fault, and then there is that disjunctive motion that will take place, and then others will divert. That's why there cannot be consensus in conversational thinking. So that is why we always have difference. But there'll be a time where we try to like look at, okay, this person have a different position, this person have a different position. Let's try to come to consensus. But the tension of incommensurability will never allow us accept or come to a consensus on any position. That's why there's going to be divergence of position. And that's why whenever we try to get to that point, we reach the Beloke point where we cannot agree with each other. Then we are bound to disagree. So the conjunctive thinking operates alongside the disjunctive thinking at this point. That's why there is a conjunctive motion and a disjunctive motion that comes to play in conversational thinking, which would never allow us to come to consensus. Thank you. So there will always continue to have new positions. So I know that is what everybody wants me to use. Instead of saying there's an old position and there is a new position. So there's bound to be new positions coming up.
Thank you very much. I can see your hand, Michael, but apologies, I won't be able to take any further questions. I think we have done enough for one day. Greetings and gratitude to Dr. Ogbonnaya, who has given us this wonderful talk today, and to all of us who raised one question or the other, or even those who participated. From the University of Calabar, University of Pretoria. It's a wonderful appreciations to all of you who have been able to join us. And we hope that you'll be able to join us for the next edition of the UP Philosophy Seminar that will take place in a few months from now in the new year. Thank you very much, Dr. Ogbonnaya, and thank you all of you who have participated, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.